All right, the right fits. We're back here on February 9th now of 2024, doing a Tucker Carlson interview review with Vladimir Putin. Man, it was a very good interview. I thought he got so much shit from the American media. Okay, you got shit from like Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC, right? Because of course they don't do real journalism, so whenever they see that, they're threatened by it. So, great interview. I would suggest you definitely watching it. It's 2 hours long, but it goes pretty quickly, especially at the beginning, because at the beginning it goes slowly because Putin talks about a lot of the history, which I think is very important. It's incredible, his knowledge of history, and that's what you'd hope and suspect from a leader of a country, which I just know our leaders of our countries do not have that background knowledge of their own country, which I think that was important to see. First off, I'm going to talk about the interesting differences between Russia and America, seeing the kind of clashes of culture. It was very, very entertaining at times. At the end, Tucker was trying to get the last word. At the end he confronted Putin about getting one of our prisoners, a journalist who was convicted of espionage there, who's now locked up in Russia. Tucker was essentially asking for him back, if he could go back with him, which was funny to see. It was great to see. It was great to push him on that. It was great to see Putin's reaction. But Tucker was trying to get the last word. He said, "I hope you'll give him back," and then he tried to end the interview. And Putin, there's no way Putin was going to just let him get the last word like that. That American journalist tried to get in as a jab, because the journalist is under the president of the whole country, right? Where that's not like how it is here. Everyone's equal here, theoretically. So there's not as much reverence given to him. So there's no way Putin was going to let him give the last word, and he didn't. And that interview went on for another 10 minutes after that. Very interesting to see that. What other clashes of culture? You could definitely tell Putin had some hesitancy, understanding he was with an American journalist, and that he was very present of what the American state of mind is about these things. So he was assuming Tucker was coming from an American, more adversarial approach, assuming Tucker was taking the sides of the opinions of the West as he was giving them. So he got defensive, but he got defensive in a very professional, reasonable, how you'd want a head of state to react. He reacted in a way of really trying to reiterate the context of the whole situation, the context goes back, years and years. He goes back to like the 800s when Russia was started. But he shows how Ukraine was developed and how the far eastern parts were Russian speaking for so long, and that they were ethnically Russian, whereas the West not so much of Ukraine. And so what they eventually were talking about was how what Putin's real, and this is why he granted Tucker Carlson the interview, is because Tucker Carlson's reasonable. He gives context to things. And so, the CIA helped overthrow the Ukrainian government in 2014 and install a U.S.-backed leader, which occurred. They took out the Russian-backed leader and installed the Ukrainian leader because of the CIA. After that, there was a civil war, essentially, where over 14,000 people died during this time and the start of the Ukrainian war. And so that's when really this all initially happened. Even going back further, which Putin was also emphasizing, which is very important. This is what educated American analysts understand about this conflict. It goes back even further than that, into the fall of the Soviet Union. At the fall of the Soviet Union, right? The Russians assumed and even asked to be in NATO, but they assumed the Cold War was over. Think about our politicians. Think about any of my older viewers. Think about how you view Russia. It's very, oh, they're a communist country. It's like, no, they're not communist. Soviet Union ended. There is no Cold War. A lot of our older politicians served during the Cold War. All our baby boomers and older were fed so much. Even some of the Gen X fed so much anti-Russia propaganda, but also anti-communist propaganda. For Vietnam and things like that. Cuba, demonizing Cuba and Venezuela, countries like that who don't want us to give them their natural resources. You really see that anti-communist, anti-Russia sentiment is still alive a lot in America, and bringing this back to the war, this is what causes a lot of Americans to actually support the war. And Russia, a lot of Americans to support the Ukrainian-Russian war. And so Vladimir Putin was pointing out that Russia, even going back to, I forget if it was George Bush or Bill Clinton, who guaranteed, I think it was George Bush, he said, NATO will not move 1 inch to the east, 1 inch towards you. That time it was in Germany. And then throughout the Clinton administration, they just added more and more countries into NATO, which is like, it would be like Russia starting in South America and starting putting countries in Central America, or starting putting military bases in Central America. That's the equivalency. We can't, Americans. One of the big things you got to get from my channel is that Americans have to look at the perspective of other people on Earth, okay? And so this was also another great point that Putin made in their back and forth, or just seeing the cultures clash. Putin, I've always seen the similarities between Russia and us. That's why there's been the Cold War, in my opinion, right? We both became superpowers around the same time. We both got nuclear weapons around the same time. And we were the two fighting superpowers after Hitler was defeated. And so, and Japan, I guess. And so, after World War II. And so we really had a lot of the same features. We're very patriotic people. We're very nationalistic people. We're very totalitarian people. Our Constitution is like a religion in both, in our country, right? The totality of the state is more important than the individual. I think most Americans would say they would die to protect their homeland. Russians are very much the same, very much patriotic, prideful people in their nationalism. Okay, they describe themselves as Russian, right? Anybody in the a lot of people who are even outside were Russian bound, like people in the eastern parts of Ukraine. And so that was another great cultural clash that they had there, where Putin explained the difference between Americans and Russians, which he described it as Americans are very pragmatic. That's how he put it. And I think that's how, like, our economy, very pragmatic. Everybody's, kind of go, do the next thing, make as much money as you can. Where they are more introspective, more thinking about, what's the right moral action. That's how he put it. What's the right moral act? They have more opinions on morals, and how you go about doing something is also important, not just the end results. So that's why he was describing many times. He said our mega billionaires or something, describing our super rich people here, our extreme capitalistic people here. The Bill Gates of the world, Jamie Dimons and stuff. So that was interesting to see his take on the differences between us, because I think there are a lot of similarities. America is a very Russo-phobic country, going back to that Cold War propaganda we had, demonizing everything they did bad, which this is just another important point. They are technically a democracy. They are technically a democracy like us. They're very corrupt, right? Putin's much more authoritarian than our leaders. I will admit that, okay? He's much more authoritarian than our leaders. He has the ability to be. Prigozhin, the guy who just tried to overthrow his government in a coup, was blown up in a plane. I don't think quite the same thing would happen here. They'd probably get hung after a jury, but, after a jury trial, but either way, the interview kept expanding on the war. Putin was explaining how this stuff goes back to those presidents who did not want to let Russia be a part of the part of the normal European society, not in the European Union. That's out of the question in America's mind. All this stuff, all being out of NATO. I know we're not involved in the European Union process membership, but we have influence, undoubtedly. And you've seen our sanctions completely backfire. He admits in the thing, which serious analysts know this in the U.S., but we blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, right? Or at least the CIA did with using one of our proxies and giving them the information and the know-how and all that stuff, but really we're the ones who did it. But Biden admits this on C-SPAN like a year ago. Well, a year before that happens, he go, yeah, we'll end it. We'll end that line. If Russia does anything we don't like, we'll end the line. And that's exactly what we did. And so this war goes back, there was just so much provocation, and trying to get Ukraine into NATO is like this is just my opinion, is like, this is not what Putin said, but is like trying to put, it's the same thing as trying to put Russian bases in Mexico. It's crazy. Why would we ever try to do that? And Bill Clinton administration officials resigned because they were like, if you go ahead and try to let these, or he threatened to resign, but I don't, because I think they think about letting Ukraine in, something like that. But he's like, if you guys provoke the Russians, they're gonna need to go to war. And so we knew this would happen. We knew Russia, would eventually, we were baiting them, essentially. Looking back, it was 100% a bait. We didn't think they'd actually do it, but they did it, and now we're suffering the consequences. Really, we're just suffering more debt. The Ukrainians, our pawns, okay, as Tucker concedes so many times that they're just our pawns. And Putin says it later on in the interview, they're our puppet state. That's exactly how it is, because we pay and make the decisions. There was a ceasefire that was already put on the table. I've talked about this before. With ex-Prime Minister Johnson from the UK. We sent him there. This is how much the European countries are our pawns. We sent him there to go talk to Zelensky to sell him no peace deals. This was 6 months into the war. He said no peace deals. They were ready to sign a peace deal. Putin says it. He talks about it. He gives Tucker classified information in the interview. Putin came off as genuine to me, and people can call me a fool. They can call Tucker a fool. I don't think they have seen a lot of journalism. I don't think a lot of Americans have seen a lot of real journalism, so I don't think they understand how it takes place. But this was hailed back in our country many times over, with people going to interview Fidel Castro, other Osama bin Laden, that made somebody's career. I forget which interviewer, but yeah, it was a great interview. It's good I'll just defend this real quick. It's good that him, an American, is willing to go over there and trust them, and there was no way he was going to get killed. I'm sure a lot of people think, oh, they could have killed him at any time. No, they're not. If it was a Russian journalist who had been pissing off Putin for years, of course they would try to kill him, right? I don't doubt that. But he genuinely trusted Tucker, which he wouldn't trust CNN, of course. Why would he? They don't treat him right. And they're calling Tucker treasonous for even talking to him, or being a puppet of Putin, which is similar to that Manchurian candidate of Putin. It's just The military media or the American media is completely wrong about this. Tucker did real journalism. He pushed him on real issues, and he continued to a point where I was like, almost like, this is could be perceived as rude, depending, because Russians are very direct. They're very direct people. They don't beat around the bush. They say exactly what they mean, and they want you. And they can come off as blunt and like almost like mean, but really they're just extremely direct. And they say, did you not understand what I'm saying? They'll just come out and say stuff like that. But Tucker, any more information on Tucker and Vladimir Putin? It was just, they started off talking about other conflicts around the world and brought it back to Ukraine. And essentially, if you want Russian understanding, if you even care, Americans. So this is what kills me about Americans, especially Christian Americans who preach hypocrisy. So the problem with American Christians is good American Christians. The problem with actual American Christians, not the people who just call themselves Christians, but the actual problem with actual Christians is that they see hypocrisy in individuals. Like they'll say, well, I shouldn't be hypocritical to this other person or whatever. I shouldn't be hypocritical in any way. Not hypocritical. It's not good. It's not good to have hypocrisy, right? To be a hypocritical person. And we see that when we compare ourselves to someone else. I shouldn't say I want this and then treat someone else differently, right? Shouldn't say I want this from them and then treat them differently. Americans, good Christian Americans, have this problem. And if any other religion subscribes to the belief that you should be a hypocritical person, then listen along too. Good American Christians have a problem with seeing that also applies to other countries. So it also applies to Afghanistan. So, some of the worst things. And I'm not a Christian person per se. I do like a lot of his morals, but if you look at how Jesus would say to treat another country, that doesn't come into the American mindset, right? How would we want Iraq to treat us, right? We wouldn't want to invade them and bomb them and occupy them for 20 years. So we shouldn't do that to them. So it's a form of sin, 100%. How, if you want to look at it like that, I don't believe in like sin in the formal context or anything, but great interview. Definitely go watch it. Great highlights, great discussion. I believe Putin was genuine, and I like how Tucker pushed him. Great interview. You guys, check it out. Please like and subscribe, brothers.